This is another assignment for estep. Alright, the first thing is interact with history. The year is 1863 and the railroad construction is booming. In the 6 years, the U.S. will be linked by rail from coast to coast. Central Pacific Railroad employs mainly Chinese immigrants to blast tunnels, lay track, and drive spikes, all for low wages. You are a journalist assigned to describe this monumental construction project for your readers. Alright, the first thing are what are the pros and cons of railroad expansion? The pros and cons of railroad expansion are, well, the pros, it's basically, whoa, we can transport a whole lot more stuff to an area. So let me try to put this in a journalistic way. New government decides to transport. Now, let me try this. New government tries to transport more stuff quickly by expanding the railroad. How will this affect you as Americans? Americans, prepare, for it is time for hard times, because not only will the railroad provide convenience for big business, but it will also put a lot more hard work on the railroad workers and tons of new immigrants to get jobs. That's basically it. What dangers will the railroad workers encounter? Dangers the railroad workers will encounter? Well, things just like, being underpaid and being worked hard, trying to get things moving faster and faster and faster. These bosses really don't care and they'll push them as hard as they can, like slaves. How will businesses and the general public benefit from the Transcontinental Railroad? I'm going to try to start this from the beginning. Transconstitutional Railroad brings new jobs, new opportunities, and big business. Businesses and farms will now be able to transfer food much quicker all across the United States of America for small train fees. How might railroad construction affect the environment? Well, obviously, it'll have a negative effect on the environment. Let's try to do this journalistically. Attention! Railroad working may have benefits towards big business and the general community, but what will it do to our environments? Our environments are already seeing major changes due to the fact that all the coal smoke pumped into the air has killed several vegetation in many places across the railroad lines. Will the government do something about this? Terms and names. For each term or name below, write a sentence explaining its connection to the industrialization of the late 19th century. Thomas Edison. Well, Thomas Edison basically pioneered the Industrial Revolution due to the fact that he invented, not only did he invent the light bulb, but he invented the electrical system. A world without Thomas Edison? Well, I don't know about that. Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell invented a hearing aid-like system for his wife because she was deaf, and it ended up becoming the telephone. George M. Pullman. George M. Pullman invented pull carts that you put on the back of trains. Where would we be without Pullman? Things would have taken a lot longer, wouldn't they? Just one cart. Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad was the railroad, in case you don't know, marked with the golden spike. And it was basically built across the Mississippi River so that people could transport goods. Interstate Commerce Act. The Interstate Commerce Act was to ensure that the government had supervision over them naughty railroad companies that might, try to abuse their employees. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was an immigrant that basically worked his way up to secretary and gained tons of power over the railroads. Antitrust Act. The Sherman Antitrust Act is an act to prevent monopoly within businesses. Too bad it's not being used today for Microsoft. Samuel Gompers. Samuel Gompers led the Cigar Makers International Union, which basically was one of the very first workers' unions. He was also the leader of the American Federation of Labor. American Federation of Labor. The American Federation of Labor was the first labor union to basically be successful by using strikes instead of violence. Mary Harris Jones. Mother Jones supported the Great Strike of mine workers, and she also got disgusted with child labor and did strikes against that. Main ideas. Answer with your information from the chapter. Number 1. How did the growth of the steel industry influence the development of other industries? Well, the growth of the steel industry helped other industries like the railroad, for example, due to the fact that iron rusted. And when steel was created, so many more options of using metal were open. Why were business leaders, such as John D. Rockefeller, called robber barons? Well, he didn't pay his employees too much and basically monopolized the oil industry by, just cheaping out his employees, made him lots more money, and then he could lower gas prices and people would buy from him instead of his. How did inventions and developments in the late 19th century change the way people worked? Well, with factories and electricity, everything was easier. Longer hours because of the light. Number 2, it was a lot easier to carry things because electricity made factories move a lot smoother with machines. Why did people, particularly farmers, demand regulation of the railroads in the late 19th century? Well, this is obviously due to the fact that the railroads were causing lots of smoke. This smoke had lots of toxic chemicals, and the chemicals got into the crops. People were getting sick, and crops were getting ruined. Why did workers form unions in the late 19th century? They formed them because they weren't being paid or treated fairly. What factor limited the success of unions? Well, due to the fact that the railroads were so big, no one could really help them. It was also due to the fact that, well, let's just say there were these people called strike busters, and they killed people in strikes. That's how it went. Why did the South industrialize a lot slower than the North did? This was probably due to the fact that they no longer had slaves to do a lot of the labor. Therefore, they had to hire people. And since the South didn't have that much money because they spent it all into this giant civil war, things kind of went down the crapper for them.